The graphic that you're looking at right here is the study itself, is the cover of the study. And you're highly encouraged, please read that study. It went out to you with the invitation to this Zoom meeting, but it also is available on our League of Women Voters Deschutes County website. Our committee agreed to do 3 things with this study. Number 1, to update the 2016 Affordable Housing Study, which only focused on the city of Bend and its public policies, but we agreed to focus on all of the municipalities in Deschutes County and the county. And the 3rd thing we agreed to do is to focus on workforce housing. In other words, the efforts made by the workforce, maybe we call them essential workers, to find housing in Deschutes County. And as Joyce mentioned, please write your questions in the chat box and we will get to them after I finish the presentation here. And if not, Joyce is going to put my personal email address in the chat box, and please email me your question and then we will get back to you with our answer, or who can give you the answer. I thought it would be a good idea to talk about your assumptions and expectations for today's presentation. I'm sure all of you would love to have an answer to what is a solution for providing housing in Deschutes County. We have many, many, many ideas. We have many perspectives. We are inspired in many ways about how public policy can influence the availability of housing for our residents in Deschutes County. However, we do not have the magic bullet, so put that aside, please. Also know that we will not be discussing homelessness in this presentation. The homeless is another issue completely different. That's about shelter. We're going to talk about housing. Also, COVID is not mentioned often in our study because we started this back in 2019 and COVID has only been a reality for the last barely a year. Also know please that myself and the committee have a limited amount of skill and knowledge. We're not anywhere as experts in public administration. So we're doing the best we can here as ordinary citizens to give our membership a report on what we found out about affordable housing or housing in Deschutes County. I want to start with this comment. Housing is investment. I want to have that be uppermost in your minds as we go through this presentation. I want that to be a perspective for us in understanding where housing is at in Deschutes County. And during the presentation, I'll be talking about the importance of housing in the community, talking about who the investors are in housing, talking about dynamic factors like supply, demand, and wages and its effect. Dynamic meaning they're changing all the time. Those effects on the housing supply, insights into housing shortage, public policy. Is it able to cure or only treat the availability of housing? Common public policy which supports housing, which is being enacted by different municipalities and also by for-profit and nonprofit organizations. That's also policy. Innovative ideas that we've come across in doing our many readings that we've done and books and meetings we've attended. I'm going to give you now the conclusion of my presentation, because the conclusion is what really this is all about. Public policy that plans, protects, preserves, and or produces housing is investing in more affordable and attainable housing. Now you may think, well, obviously that's kind of a duh, but I know of public policy that doesn't protect and preserve and produce housing. So this is something that the League of Women Voters, our members, should keep in mind as far as creating positions on housing in Deschutes County and what we would like to support in public policy concerning housing. Okay. This is the importance of housing. It's rather obvious. the effect of the quality of life in a community when housing is available or not available, the impacts on transportation when there is more housing, more growth, the impact, the human costs, the community cost, health costs, economic cost, and we discuss this more in the study. I like the quote here by Dr. Desmond: housing is absolutely essential to human flourishing. Without stable shelter, it all falls apart. This is so important to our community. And I think I may assume here, that's why you all are attending this presentation. You'll be looking here at lots of logos. Do we have Habitat for Humanity, I hope? Yes, we do, good. Habitat for Humanity, different municipalities, nonprofits, for-profit associations like CORE, COBA, Central Oregon Builders Association. They are all interested in policy, and their policy is an intention to find solutions for protecting housing for our residents. Yet, with all the work they are doing, the crisis is growing. I just love that, I'm sorry, that animation, but it reminds me that we as a committee and as a membership want to thank you all that met with us. Over 13 different organizations were interviewed as part of this study, and they were just so patient with us, and so much information that we got from our interviews. Thank you so much from all of us. There's two ways to create housing, two ways: investment and or donation. That's the only way to create housing. These are the dynamic factors that impact housing in a community: demand, supply, wages. I chose the background, if you can see it there. It's suburbia personified. There's suburbia. That's what happened since the 1950s in creating house after house after house to meet the demand of that lovely family in that photo from the 1950s who had a dream of owning their own home. That was their dream. They weren't thinking about investing. They weren't thinking about the appreciation and the value of their house. They only were thinking about the freedom they had in owning their property rather than renting from a landlord who was going to prescribe to them the condition of their house and the rent they were paying. They were a happy couple, but also a side note, there also not much diversity there in that couple, is there? Okay, let's start with demand. Population growth. Boy, do we know how that affects housing in Deschutes County. Go ahead and read that table. I won't read it to you. I think the data in that table is conservative. It's coming from Portland State University. By the way, that's a great site to go to for information on housing statistics. And our study, by the way, we're so excited that we were able to do hyperlinks in the study, and you'll have lots of fun if you're the kind of geek I am about information, and just click on those hyperlinks in our study and have a lot of fun finding all kinds of information that's been posted on the web about the whole issue of housing, and nationally and also locally. So have fun with that. The quote there you see is about the people that are coming into Deschutes County from the Bay Area, Seattle, Portland, etc., and how they are selling their homes there in the larger urban areas for more money, and now are moving into Bend and buying our houses. Demand. Another effect on demand is the low mortgage interest rate right now. Wow, historic lows on interest rates. So that means that someone who buys a home is actually getting a higher return on investment as a buyer. That's encouraging investment, like the stock market, really. These are points I want to make for you, to just some things to think about and influence on housing. Them that has gets. So banks are lending to people who don't need money, right? We all know that. So therefore, people in need of housing might not be able to borrow the money to buy a house. there's this influx from the Zoom economy, people coming into our buying homes. 37% of jobs nationally are mostly high wage and are the people who can work from home and work remotely. Homeownership is the single best way to build wealth. I can't say that strongly enough. Just think about that. That's me, that's perhaps you, that's part of our community here in Deschutes County. The average homeowner has 80 times the wealth as that of a renter. Renter growth will be more than twice the pace of homeowner growth. And you probably are wondering how I don't get that, because if there's such a good deal in buying a home, why will there be more renters? Okay, here's why. Here's one of the reasons. I'm going to read off my notes here. Millennials, excuse me, that's age 24 to 39, 48% of them own a home. Boomers, like myself, right now, 78% of us own a home. When we all were 30 years old, the millennials at the age of 30, 42% of them owned a home. Gen X, which is age 40 to 55, 48% of them at age 30 owned a home. And us boomers at the age of 30, 51% of us owned a home. So you see the trend here? Got to live somewhere, they're going to be renting, not buying these homes. The US tax and mortgage rules turbocharge residential real estate speculation. Excuse me while I find my notes here. So in other words, how does the US tax and mortgage rules turbocharge residential real estate? Well, because anyone who has a home and has a mortgage and has interest rates, as interest to be paid, gets to write that interest expense off their taxes. Not only that, but also the expense of the property tax is written off of their income from their taxes. Renters don't have that advantage, do they? So here's an interesting information that I found in my research, in our research. American families who earn more than $200,000 receive federal housing assistance worth 4 times as much as federal housing assistance for families that earn less than $20,000. You don't think of it that way, do you? But maybe we should. Maybe we should think of that advantage of owning a home. This is an amazing piece of data here. 1 trillion more in additional home equity was created in 1 year. That's a lot of money. 1 trillion more in home equity. Let's get to supply. We talked about demand, supply, rental shortage, the supply of rental units. And this graph, by the way, is in our study, showing in Deschutes County the struggle to find rental housing. Again, people who can't afford to purchase a home need to rent. The median renter's wage is $15. A household of 4 people must earn close to $43,000 a year just to afford a 2-bedroom apartment. That means mom and dad are in 1 bedroom and the children are in another bedroom. That's pretty minimal housing. Tax code favors those who build apartments, doesn't favor those who live in them. Renting is not a financial investment. Homeownership is. So housing is investment, one way or the other. It can be an investment for the resident, individual, or an investment for a developer, either for the subdivision or for an apartment building. Okay, the supply of housing itself. This is for Bend. This is not Deschutes County, this is Bend. Almost 72% of housing in Bend is single family dwelling. Nationally, it's 65%. So Bend is heavy in single family dwelling units. And the figures on the right, you might be asking, 816 fourplexes? No, that's 816 residential units within the fourplexes, okay? So the city of Bend, that's what we're talking about here, is looking to increase the availability of more multifamily housing away from single family housing, because that is heavy in using land and heavy in investment of our resources and infrastructure for supporting single family dwelling. That's that going back to that dream from the 1950s of people wanting to have their own house. Okay, that's an important point. Lots of single family housing in Bend. While we were doing the study, we heard over and over again from nonprofit and government people that we were interviewing about the AMI, the Area Median Income. That's a measure that needs to be used when an organization wishes to give a subsidy for housing. They have to look, they're using the AMI to judge whether a family is eligible for the financial subsidy. HUD, the Housing Urban Development Agency in our federal government, which by the way, locally is represented by the Housing Works, that's for Central Oregon, Housing Works, and they're the ones who provide Section 8 vouchers. And their definition, they define affordable housing this way. It does not cost more than 30% of a family's income and no more than 80% of the area median income. And they may be eligible then for financial subsidy from the federal government. Okay. Now, many of you may have come to today's presentation thinking about affordable housing in a more general term. For instance, someone came to you, maybe it was a relative, said, you know, my wife and I are earning $100,000 a year, or we're earning $230,000 a year, and we can't find an affordable house in Deschutes County. What's going on? There's a lack of affordable housing. Well, what there is a lack of attainable housing. Housing that meets the needs of family incomes between 80 and 120% of the average median income. By the way, incomes are usually considered the family of 4 people, so it could be 2 wage earners. So this housing of attainable housing is not usually subsidized. It can be, there can be some financial assistance, and cities are calling this middle housing. I know Bend, Redmond is looking to create more middle housing, attainable housing, which takes the form of multi-family housing, duplexes, triplexes, and now allowed to be placed on single residential zoned land. I want to point out here, by the way, before I forget, so much of the land, at least in Bend, is secured by development that was done in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and even 2000, 2010, that is protected by CC&Rs. That's covenants and restrictions, which means that we can't change now the use of that land. I don't know the percentage. I'm guessing 70% of land in Bend is covered by CC&Rs. Let's take an example of using the AMI and related to attainable housing in Bend. So you take the area median income of a region times it by the AMI of that region, right? So in Bend, it's 78,000 is the AMI. So 80% of that, a family of 4 would be earning 62,000 a year. And 30%, which is the rule of thumb we all are familiar with from back in the 1950s, when it was what banks used to say, you can afford to buy a house. It's only 30% of your income. So you can afford to pay $1,550 a month for your housing if you're earning 62,000 in Bend. However, that amount is including insurance and property tax. So your mortgage payment may be $1,200 a month, but then you've got the insurance and the real estate tax, and 120,000 of 78, and you see the math there. So you see the squeeze on these middle income workforce residents in Deschutes County. The poverty line, just for your information, is $26,500 for an income for a family of 4 per year. The Oregon minimum wage is $12 an hour as of January 1st of this year. So that's close to $25,000 a year just for one worker. So if there's 2 adults in the household working, that's a $50,000 a year income on a minimum wage in Oregon, which sounds adequate. But as you see from the box above as an example in Bend, probably is not adequate to buy a house, maybe adequate to rent. Wages, let's talk about the wages. I'm going to let you go ahead and read that on the left there. That's the workforce we were talking about. These are housing, the median housing prices is $420 for Deschutes County. So a teacher's salary, a teacher, say a single mom who was a teacher, could afford to purchase a home that was $327,000, whereas a construction worker, $185,000, so forth and so on. In the thought bubble here, the median house price in Bend is $580,000. In Redmond, $377,000, and the rest of the municipalities, by the way, the median house price is in our study, and this graphic is in our study. This data here that says in January of 2020, that was a quote from a realtor that was interviewed by Z21 on February 17th. And he said that they had a 115-day inventory of houses for sale in January of 2020. And now January 2021, they have 14 days of inventory. That's a huge statement. And I want to give you a quote from him. I thought it was so interesting. It says, this is Mr. Derek Cox of Central Oregon Realtor. There's a lot of people looking to park money here right now, he said. You know, the stock market is very volatile. And so for me, the last handful of houses I've been able to help out have been investors, knowing that Bend will probably continue to appreciate. Cox said he's seen more investors from California that are looking in Bend for a rental property, and they can often afford to pay cash. So what that means is investors from California, they live in California, are coming into Bend and buying homes and making them rental property, hopefully long-term rental, not short-term vacation rentals, hopefully. But still, the residents here in Deschutes County are not investing in their property as renters. They're just paying that as an expense of the cost of their living here in Central Oregon. Okay, look at that. 2020 California median home value, $579,000. Look familiar? Bend, median home value, $580,000. Okay, here's some other factors to consider in what is impacting the housing shortage in Deschutes County. You know, people talk about the urban growth boundary limits, and okay, yes, but we could discuss this for a week as to if we increase the land right now, tomorrow, if there were 1,000 new houses, how long would they remain for sale? And really, would the price be lower? You wonder. Increasing housing construction costs, right? This last year, since COVID, the cost of wood has doubled. Use of residential housing for short-term lodging, we already alluded to that. Housing should be for residents. We're making housing, we've allowed housing to be for tourists. Is that what we want to do? Is that a public policy we want to support? Zoning restrictions, this has historically been an impact on housing production. I put an asterisk there, by the way. It's the darling right now of public policy to change zoning, to change code. Consumer choice for single family, again, getting back to that family from the 50s, is that serving our community to encourage single family housing, or should public policy be encouraging multifamily? COVID, of course, is exacerbating all these influences on housing. Insufficient infrastructure. Oh my gosh, you know this just by common sense. You've read about it. We need more infrastructure in Deschutes County. We need roads. We need sewer and water. We need, what am I thinking? Web internet connections for everyone. And I thought this was an interesting point. Student debt. You say, what does that have to do with anything? Well, we already talked and alluded about the next generation is not going to be able to afford to buy our appreciated homes, right? Well, right now there's $1.7 trillion worth of student debt. There are 45 million people living in the United States of America with student debt, of which 40% never got their degree. They invested that money, they took out a debt that is forever, by the way. It is never excused in a bankruptcy. It will exist with this generation of students forever. 40% never earned that degree that will allow them to make a higher wage, which was the idea of taking out the student debt. These are popular measures that are used to meet the demand for more housing. Increase the UGB. Ben did that in 2016. We received 2,800 acres that we were allowed now to build housing on. I'm not sure where we are in how many of those houses have been built. I think we're making progress on that. I myself personally, this is my subjective opinion, are concerned about what happened with mixed use down there in the southeast part of Bend, where the UGB is being, where our new acquisition of property is being built upon. I don't see any grocery stores down there or coffee shops or any commercial amenities. Zoning changes, expands land use. That is so popular right now. Bend, Redmond, they're changing their codes in order to allow more housing per acre, waiving parking restrictions, looking at the setback back requirements. Land is valuable. Land, as much housing as you can put on it, is the trend for public policy right now, both locally, for the county, for the state, and probably nationally. HB 2001 encouraged and allowed local governments to allow multifamily on single family zoning. Public policy is encouraging landfill, empty lots, build them up, decrease the cost of producing housing. Public policy can affect the cost by waiving system and development charges, by giving tax breaks, by allocating certain areas of land as urban renewal projects. There's opportunity zones. There's all kinds of tools that are available to encourage housing and to decrease the cost of producing the housing. The repurposing of existing buildings, this is becoming really the darling right now of public policy. Encourage developers to take empty buildings, for instance, Penny's at the north side of town. Wouldn't that make a great apartment building? The infrastructure is in place, the amenities are right there for shopping, and perhaps the city of Bend can attract a developer to do just that. Create new state and local legislation. We as league members should be on top of what's happening legislation-wise and supporting whatever is passed to address the crisis and enforce existing legislation. Educate the public. The public has to be informed about what is happening with the housing. So these are innovative solutions and measures that we came across in our readings. Of course, who doesn't want to attract businesses that pay higher wages? That should be a goal, and I know it is. I believe it is for the chambers of commerce and for our development departments and our city governments. Recognize the impact of climate change and the new Zoom economy. Yeah, we've talked about it, but keep talking about it, keep talking about it. Encourage change in housing type expectations. Get away from that 1950s dream of everybody's got to have their little house with their picket fence. For one thing, it's not much of a little house anymore. Back then it was probably 1,000 square feet. Now it's 2,000 square feet. Let's make better use of our land for our families. And also local builders. Let's encourage local builders who are able to have more of an imagination about housing. They're not stuck in a template as developers of subdivisions are. Repurpose buildings, that again is using existing buildings that are that could be built upon. HB 3450 was passed in 2019, and that allows the building of residential on top of commercial. For instance, I believe Wagner Mall would qualify for that building of residential apartments on top of the existing commercial. State income tax deduction, well, that's pie in the sky, isn't it? Could the federal government or the state government decide, our legislature decide, that renters should also get a tax deduction for paying rent? Something to think about. And maybe it's time to tax restaurant meals for 1%. Use that funding for affordable housing, for building infrastructure, support deed restricted or community land trust housing development. That means when the home someone owns is on land that they don't own, and they rent that land, it tends to be housing that is less expensive, less costly. Enact a state or local tenant opportunity purchase act. This was something interesting. As you know, Bend or Redmond could pass a law that says when there is an owner of an apartment building or a mobile home park that wants to sell, they need to give the residents the right of first refusal in purchasing that. That gives renters an opportunity to invest in their housing. Create rental housing for transient seasonal workforce, students, etc. So there are people here in Deschutes County who have invested in creating workspace, shared workspace. How about developers of shared living space? Perhaps that's an investment for a developer. Create a new nonprofit to provide realtor and financial and title services. We've been told or understand that there is some difficulty in marketing housing that is on community land trust property. And perhaps there's a need for a nonprofit. And that same nonprofit could be organizing an annual Central Oregon Affordable Housing Conference at the fairgrounds. If we can promote sports, I think that's going on this weekend, excellent, I'm glad, but also let's promote affordable housing and education of the public about housing. Improve and broaden developers' public notice requirements. I think the public doesn't know enough about what is being developed in housing in Deschutes County. And it's very difficult as an individual resident to go online and try to find out, according to that property number, what are they building? What was ascribed as affordable housing? How much? What percentage? What were the breaks? What are the tax breaks to that developer? I think it should be public notice posted on the development site. Identify, allow, and promote unique land uses. So encourage like co-op public homes, any way in which we can, as a government, public policy, encourage the creation of some way that renters can also invest in their property. Public policy in Deschutes County. That's what the League of Women Voters membership is about supporting, is public policy. So we already talked about if that public policy is part of planning housing, protecting existing housing, preserving existing housing. In other words, instead of scraping housing, to rehab housing, to promote to the understanding of the housing issues in Deschutes County, and of course, anything that leads to the reduction of more housing. And this lovely family is now colored in because they've changed. It's not black and white anymore, is it? It's really got some color to it. Final slide. Is the housing problem defined correctly? We're not going to be able to really address housing issues unless we understand the problem and define it correctly. Is it about more housing Or is it about where we are investing and who is investing and when we're investing and how much we're investing? How can government and community policy cure the housing crisis, not just continue to treat the crisis? All right. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your attention to this.